In the turbulent heart of West Africa, the small nation of Burkina Faso has found itself at the center of a global geopolitical chessboard. Its leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, rose to power in 2022 during a wave of military coups that swept the Sahel. But what followed has shocked the world, not because of domestic politics, but because of the international response it triggered. Today we uncover a dramatic story involving Russian President Vladimir Putin, American fighter jets, and a confrontation in African skies that almost turned the region into a flashpoint between world powers. A story the mainstream media hesitated to highlight. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a young and charismatic leader, has earned both admiration and criticism for his anti-colonial stance and bold rhetoric against Western influence, particularly that of France and the United States. His government expelled French troops, turned to Russia for military support, and vowed to liberate Burkina Faso from all forms of foreign interference. This shift did not go unnoticed by Washington. Reports emerged suggesting U.S. intelligence and military planners were growing increasingly concerned about the deepening ties between the Sahelian junta governments and Moscow, particularly Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, where Russian Wagner Group forces have been spotted. These developments raised alarms in the Pentagon and among NATO allies. Then came the incident that sent shockwaves through diplomatic channels. Sources close to Burkina Faso's government claimed that unidentified fighter jets, presumed to be American or operating under American command, entered Burkinabe airspace under the guise of a surveillance operation. The official U.S. position was that these flights were routine intelligence-gathering missions over the Sahel, targeting extremist groups like ISIS and al-Qaeda-affiliated militants. But Ouagadougou saw things differently. Captain Traoré and his military command viewed the intrusion as a violation of sovereignty, a potential threat to his leadership, and a form of intimidation. He immediately contacted his new allies in Moscow. According to regional reports within hours, a Russian Air Force communication channel was opened. The message was clear: any unauthorized military aircraft threatening Burkina Faso's sovereignty would be met with a response. What happened next was unprecedented in modern African military history. Russian Sukhoi fighter jets, operating out of an undisclosed location, possibly in Mali or a temporary forward base, scrambled and intercepted the unidentified aircraft. Military sources claimed the Russian pilots locked onto the foreign jets and issued a direct warning: disengage immediately or face retaliation. The U.S.-linked jets, aware of the risks of direct confrontation with Russian forces over a sovereign African nation, withdrew. No shots were fired, no lives were lost. But the message was unmistakable. Burkina Faso was no longer in the Western sphere of influence, and any attempt to undermine that new reality would be met with resistance. For Captain Ibrahim Traoré, this was not only a strategic win but a personal one. His call for help was answered not by a regional ally, but by one of the world's most powerful military nations. Putin, always seeking to expand Russia's global footprint and challenge U.S. influence, had just made a bold move, without firing a missile. Western analysts were quick to downplay the incident, citing a lack of verifiable satellite evidence or flight logs. However, Burkinabe officials released radar data and voice communication snippets allegedly confirming the timeline. The Kremlin, in its typical fashion, neither confirmed nor denied involvement, but pro-Russian media celebrated the maneuver as a symbol of rising multipolarity. The implications are enormous. In one symbolic moment, Burkina Faso positioned itself as the epicenter of a growing anti-Western coalition in Africa. The message to other African nations was clear: sovereignty is not a myth, and with the right alliances, it can be defended. This event also raised serious questions in Washington. Could the U.S. risk open confrontation with Russia over African territory? Was it worth it to try and control a region that no longer wants outside interference? Or is it time to accept that the geopolitical landscape of Africa is shifting permanently? Meanwhile, for Ibrahim Traoré, the incident boosted his image domestically. Once seen as a transitional figure, he now stands as a national hero, a defiant symbol of independence. His public approval surged, youth movements rallied behind him, and his speeches, increasingly pan-African and anti-imperial, are gaining traction across the continent. This wasn't just about fighter jets or airspace, it was about control, about dignity, about the future of Africa. And whether you support or oppose the players involved, it's clear. The days of unchecked Western dominance in Africa are numbered. The story of how Putin saved Ibrahim Traoré may not be found on the front page of major Western newspapers, but in the streets of Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey, it's already legend. A tale of resistance, alliance, and a new world order that is no longer dominated by one side. Stay tuned, because this is just the beginning. The balance of power is shifting, and Africa is no longer just a stage but a major player in the global game. Let's now turn to another riveting chapter in this unfolding saga, one that adds even more fire to the geopolitical drama brewing in West Africa. Shortly after the high-altitude showdown that saw American jets back down over Burkina Faso, neighboring Niger, led by General Abdourahmane Tiani, found itself at the heart of another tense international standoff. And once again, the Russians played a pivotal role. After Niger's military ousted the pro-Western government in 2023, the new leadership made a decisive break from France and began reassessing all ties with Western powers, including the United States. For decades, the U.S. had maintained a massive drone base near Agadez, known as Airbase 201, which served as a key hub for surveillance and counterterrorism operations in the Sahel. It cost over $100 million and was staffed by hundreds of American personnel. But in early 2025, everything changed. Niger's government, emboldened by what happened in Burkina Faso and increasingly frustrated with what they called unilateral military operations, issued a startling ultimatum. All U.S. forces must vacate Nigerian territory within 30 days. The Americans were stunned. Diplomats scrambled. Pentagon officials warned of regional destabilization. But Niger did not budge. Then came the most dramatic part. According to leaked intelligence, Russian advisors, believed to be former Wagner operatives now, absorbed into the Russian state apparatus, were invited to inspect the U.S. airbase facilities. The U.S. interpreted this as a red line. Suddenly, the region was on edge. American reconnaissance planes began circling the Nigerian airspace with increasing frequency. Nigerian air defense systems, recently upgraded with Russian radar and equipment, went on high alert. Russian military cargo planes were spotted landing at Niamey's International Airport. The message was loud and clear. Niger, like Burkina Faso, was under Moscow's protective umbrella. Tensions reached a climax when a U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone was detected loitering near a Russian logistics convoy heading toward a Nigerian base. According to anonymous military sources, the drone's feed was abruptly jammed mid-operation, not by local forces, but by Russian electronic warfare systems. The Reaper lost contact with its command center for nearly 20 minutes, forcing it to retreat. No statement was issued publicly, but in defense circles it sent a chilling signal. And in a bold move days later, General Tiani publicly declared, "Africa is not a hunting ground for foreign powers. We have chosen our path. We will defend our skies, our land, and our sovereignty, with our allies, whoever they may be." Again, Moscow remained ambiguous. But pro-Kremlin media in Russia celebrated the developments, hailing Niger's defiance as part of a growing African Spring, a wave of countries finally breaking free from neo-colonial dominance and choosing their own alliances. The domino effect is unmistakable. From Mali to Burkina Faso, and now Niger, a new power axis is emerging. Russia, long dismissed as a secondary player in Africa, is now being seen as a reliable partner by governments who feel betrayed or manipulated by Western powers. Meanwhile, the U.S. and its allies are scrambling to redefine their strategy in Africa. Old models of influence, military presence, development aid with conditions, and political backing for friendly regimes are no longer yielding the same results. A new generation of African leaders, led by bold figures like Ibrahim Traoré and General Tiani, are rewriting the rules. This isn't just about ideology. It's about leverage, power, realignment. The West thought Africa would always be the silent continent, reacting, never acting. But today, African nations are showing the world they are no longer willing to be passive pieces on someone else's board. They are making their own moves and reshaping the global order in the process. As these stories continue to unfold, one thing is clear. The struggle for influence in Africa is intensifying. And this time, the continent is not just watching, it's fighting back, choosing its allies and defining its destiny on its own terms. And now we take you to the heart of Mali, a nation that has become one of the most critical battlegrounds in this emerging East versus West struggle for Africa. A story not just of diplomacy and military strategy, but of covert operations, sabotage, and a chilling warning sent in the shadows of the Sahara. Following the 2021 French-led Operation Barkhane's wind-down and eventual departure from Mali, the country fell into a security vacuum. Jihadist attacks surged. Civilians paid the price. But instead of turning to France or the West for help, Mali shocked the world by inviting the Russian Wagner Group to help stabilize its territory. This move infuriated Paris and raised eyebrows in Washington. Mali, long considered a pillar of France's African policy, had flipped. Not quietly, but publicly, and unapologetically. Soon after, French troops left under tense circumstances, but what followed was even more stunning. Early 2025, a series of mysterious explosions rocked an old French intelligence listening post near Kidal in northern Mali. The facility, previously dormant since France's withdrawal, had reportedly still been receiving aerial surveillance data from NATO drones flying far beyond official mission boundaries. Malian intelligence accused French operatives of trying to maintain a shadow network, a clandestine foothold to influence internal affairs and monitor Russian activities in the region. Days later, Wagner-linked forces raided another former base outside Gao and claimed to uncover encrypted satellite equipment and caches of weapons allegedly left behind for future use by local militias loyal to France. France denied everything, but the damage was done. What many don't know is what happened next, something that didn't make international headlines, but sent tremors through intelligence communities worldwide. A top Malian general, Colonel Sidiki Diallo, survived an assassination attempt just a week after the raid. His convoy was hit by an improvised explosive device on the outskirts of Bamako. Miraculously, he survived, but 4 soldiers were killed. Malian authorities quickly blamed a foreign-trained cell for the attack and claimed it had links to external intelligence agencies. Though no names were mentioned, the implications were clear. In response, Mali declared a total freeze on all remaining Western NGOs operating in the country. Several U.S.-linked humanitarian offices were shuttered overnight. Mali's government accused them of acting as cover for intelligence gathering, an accusation the U.S. State Department swiftly denied. Then came the moment of escalation. In a surprise move, Russia deployed a small team of air defense specialists to Timbuktu and installed a short-range missile defense system, previously seen only in Eastern Europe. Satellite images confirmed the presence of what looked like a Pantsir S-1 system, capable of shooting down drones and low-flying aircraft. Mali, for the first time in its post-independence history, had real anti-air capabilities, not provided by the West, but by Moscow. Soon after, U.S. drones disappeared from the skies over northern Mali. Surveillance activity sharply declined. And in a closed-door UN session, American diplomats warned that foreign interference in the Sahel was becoming a serious threat to international peace. But for Mali, this wasn't foreign interference, it was liberation. President Assimi Goïta, a former colonel turned head of state after the 2021 coup, addressed the nation and declared, "For the first time in decades, Mali decides who flies over its skies, who steps on its soil, and who influences its future. We are not anti-West. We are pro-sovereignty. And just like in Burkina Faso and Niger, the people rallied behind their leadership. Russian flags began to appear in markets and schools. Murals of Putin alongside African revolutionaries were painted in Bamako. Propaganda? Maybe. But to many it represented hope. A shift away from a colonial legacy toward a new model of partnership. For the West, Mali now represents a painful symbol. A former ally turned vocal critic, bolstered by a rival superpower. But, for Africa, it's becoming something else entirely. A blueprint. A blueprint for independence, for redefining alliances, for reclaiming agency in a world that has too often written Africa's story without African voices. As the continent watches these events unfold, from the skies of Burkina Faso to the deserts of Mali, one truth becomes undeniable. A silent revolution is underway. And it's not led by protesters with signs, but by presidents with defiance, soldiers with resolve, and nations with a vision. More stories will emerge. More alliances will shift. But this much is certain. The age of quiet compliance is over. Africa is speaking, and the world must now listen. Let's now head to the Gulf of Guinea, a region that for years has been a quiet stronghold for Western influence in Africa. But even here, the winds of change are picking up, and the ripples from the Sahel's anti-Western wave are beginning to reach coastal shores. This is the story of how Togo, a small West African nation often overlooked on the world stage, became the epicenter of an intelligence face-off between the CIA and Russian operatives. For decades, Togo maintained strong military and economic ties with France and, by extension, the United States. Its ports were crucial logistical nodes, and its intelligence-sharing agreements made it a quiet ally in regional counterterrorism operations. But in late 2024, things started to shift. Leaked diplomatic cables revealed that President Faure Gnassingbé was under mounting pressure from segments of the military and civil society to reevaluate the country's foreign policy. Protests erupted in Lomé, not over internal economic conditions but against what demonstrators called the occupation of the mind, referring to the enduring grip of French and American interests. Then, something extraordinary happened. High-ranking Togolese intelligence officer defected. His destination? Moscow. Within weeks, reports emerged that he had turned over years of classified documents detailing joint U.S.-Togolese surveillance operations on nearby African governments, including Burkina Faso and Mali. One particular revelation stunned analysts. A covert CIA outpost in the outskirts of Lomé, previously disguised as an agricultural research institute, had been monitoring Russian aircraft movements and training camps across West Africa. The Russian response was immediate and calculated. In early 2025, a delegation of Russian advisors quietly landed in Togo under the pretense of technical military cooperation. Within days, U.S. officials requested a high-level meeting with President Gnassingbé, urging him to reaffirm Togo's commitment to Western security alliances. But the president, emboldened by what he saw happening in the Sahel, refused to publicly take sides. Then came the moment that exposed the shadow war to the world. A firefight broke out in Lomé one night near the port. Official statements described it as a gang dispute, but eyewitnesses and leaked security footage told a different story. A clash between foreign operatives. Some identified as U.S. security contractors. Others, speaking Russian, were reportedly seen loading electronic equipment into SUVs with diplomatic plates. No deaths were confirmed, but the message was loud and clear. Both sides were operating on the ground and tensions had reached a dangerous boiling point. In response, the Togolese government expelled several foreign nationals, not naming their countries of origin, and announced the formation of a new Strategic Security Advisory Board to oversee intelligence cooperation. Insiders believe this board includes Russian representatives. Meanwhile, U.S. forces began quietly pulling back some of their assets from Lomé, relocating surveillance operations to offshore ships in the Gulf of Guinea. At the same time, Pro-Russia, media outlets in Africa celebrated Togo's neutrality, calling it a courageous act of sovereignty in the face of global pressure. And then, in a move that shocked observers across the continent, President Gnassingbé traveled to Moscow. He signed a wide-ranging security pact that included not only arms purchases and cybersecurity training, but also what insiders call mutual intelligence safeguards, essentially an agreement not to spy on each other's allies. The CIA was now locked out. The shift was complete. Togo, once a quiet ally of the West, had pivoted, not with dramatic speeches or military coups, but with silence, secrecy, and strategic calculation. It became a symbol of how even the smallest countries in Africa are no longer afraid to play the great powers against each other and win. In Washington, frustration grew. In Moscow, confidence soared. But in Africa, something deeper was happening. Nations that once stayed quiet on global affairs were now becoming key players in the global intelligence game. And as this story continues to develop, one thing is becoming increasingly obvious. This is no longer just a battle for military bases or economic deals. It's a battle for influence, information, and ideology. Africa isn't just shifting its alliances, it's becoming the chessboard, and in many ways, the chess master. And the world is just beginning to understand what that means.